everyone, salam and namaste. My name is Ashish and I'm from Oxfam and presenting you Oxfam's first podcast series from Oxfam in Bangladesh here. Welcome to you all. This whole new initiative is to have a communication with Gen Z, but not only limited to that. It's also to see that how Oxfam in Bangladesh is now taking advantage of this technology, this whole social media space, to connect with the new coming people, with other kind of stakeholders, and to discuss and explore various challenges that we are facing together in the development space. The purpose of this initiative is to explore this knowledge and to see that how our new programming can be influenced and can meet the new challenges that we are facing together. So welcome everyone. Today, in this very first episode, we are starting this with our own Julian Francis. Julian needs no introduction to many in Bangladesh, particularly those who know 1971, the history, the Oxfam's present at that time in India. But for others, I think it is a point to be noted that Julian has not only be the active participant in the whole nation building process later on, but he has been witnessing some significant milestone in the history of Bangladesh for last 52 years. So today with Julian, we are going to explore more in terms of what do we mean by freedom, what this whole freedom stands about. I'm sure, Julian, you have been bombarded in this last 1 week or so with this 16th December, the Victory Day, about all this walking down into the memory lane for multiple times. Perhaps today, I'm not saying that we will be completely past that, but the purpose is not only to walk down to the memory lane, but it's also to explore more in terms of conceptually what the freedom meant at that time to multiple people, and how it stands today, and how the whole understanding of freedom has changed over a period of time, and whether it has changed or not. So I'll start with maybe a first broad question as what exactly was going on in 1970-71 when this whole movement around potential possibility of an independent country started in March with the historical speech from Sheikh Mujib then. What exactly it meant as a freedom to everyone?
Well, I think it started a bit before that because at the time of the tragic cyclone of November 1970, the news of that cyclone took some time to reach. Never forget about the outside world, but even the severity wasn't clear to Dhaka for a day or two, and then the reaction of the Pakistan government was very slow, and Oxfam's office that covered East Pakistan was actually based in eastern India in Bihar, and they started receiving messages from other agencies like CARE and the Catholic Relief Services about the severity, and then it transpired that international, even government aid got into the affected area before the central government of Pakistan got organized, and it was seen in the field that the largely Punjabi military, who by that time had taken on responsibility for the relief activities, they were, well, it doesn't matter if Bengalis die, after all, they're only Bengalis. That sort of attitude. So that anger spread quite a lot through the media eventually, and so that then people that by that time or before that in fact, a general election had been called, and after years of presidential rule, so this was a new beginning in a way, and that general election was at the beginning of December 1970, and outside observers felt that, oh, well, it's bound to be delayed because of the tragedy, but it wasn't delayed, and then. Then, as people know, the Awami League won complete control of not only East Pakistan, but they won enough seats to form the government. But everything got delayed, and then I was in Bihar as a volunteer on an Oxfam project, and we got news sometimes through the BBC World Service radio, and we got the newspapers like the Statesman newspaper from Calcutta. We got it the following day. It would come up by train, so we were not really up to date, but the Bengali community in the small town that I was in, they were excited that they were convinced that, you know, Bangladesh will be a reality. But I was rather skeptical. How could they think that? So then the March the 7th, which was virtually a call for independence. It wasn't actually, but they wanted more devolved control. I mean, they wanted more control over things, and they wanted a fairer slice of the national budget. Because there were, I don't know the proportion exactly, I can't remember, but the population of East Pakistan was significantly greater than West Pakistan, and the only sort of major export from Pakistan was jute, which was so foreign exchange was coming in, but it wasn't benefiting East Pakistan as it should. So there was a lot of anger, and then basically the call for non-cooperation and the call for Hartal, and so that there was a lot of fury, and by that time it wasn't just the political actors in East Pakistan, but it had spread through the media, even though the media was controlled. But
there are a couple of things that are coming up from this. Like, one, when you said that in 1970, I mean, there's a pretext of the actual freedom movement call, and there was basically a mass feeling that we are being neglected, discriminated based on what we are, which is an identity. So people came together as Bengalis at that time, if I'm correct. So that's one narrative or one way of understanding the freedom, that whenever any particular community is neglected on the basis of its identity, it could be anything, it could be a cultural identity, it could be a faith-based identity. But if it is constantly and consciously discriminated and oppressed by another one, then perhaps the chance of history being repeated is high. The other thing that you mentioned about how the economics worked, and there are quite a number of perspectives around that as well, that how this part of then East Pakistan was more fertile, more productive, more had more probability of making international trade and having the foreign currency, but of course not having the fair share. And then there was another perspective about geopolitical distinction, that, how it was cut off. There is a huge India in between, so the connect between the two sides of that time's Pakistan was keeping people to people connection away. Of course, technology was not as advanced at that time as it's now. So all these things have also meant by secluding people. But then all of these are realities of today's time as well. Even today, there are people who feel that they are being discriminated. There is a very strong class divide. There is one class which enjoying the benefits, privileges, and there is one that is not having access even to a basic rights or basic food, right? How do you say this? Do you then think that uh, this is really right, or do you still think that then this perhaps will continue in future as well?
Yeah, it is. It's very true. I mean, we notice it more in this part of Dhaka with the BMWs and Mercedes and Land Rovers and Range Rovers and the gap between the rich and the poor is getting wider, and it's one of the things I've often spoken about and written about, is that the people who should be paying income tax are somehow avoiding paying income tax. And if there was more tax collection, then some of the poorest people who need assistance, social welfare, would be helped. So it's a very serious situation. I always remember that in January 1972, there was a lot of euphoria and excitement, and with freedom, and Sheikh Mujib had just returned, but 2 months later, by which time the civil service was getting a bit organized, and the international UN and others were understanding quite how bad the situation was. There was a report agreed by a number of donors that said something like, unless food supplies are insured, and that was about 500,000 tons of food grain per month, and communication restored as quickly as possible, they doubted whether Bangladesh could survive as a nation state. Well, a lot of Bangladesh's social scientists and others are communicating that concern. That doesn't seem to be reflected in what the government is doing. So it is. I think it's a great concern, and I think one could also say that because there hasn't been an active opposition in Parliament, so the government have not been held to account, and they haven't been receiving constructive criticism, which is essential in a healthy democracy, and this is a concern. Despite all the development that has happened, I mean, whether it's the huge increase in the tonnage of rice being produced, or the infrastructure and the road transport, I think 50 years ago, 40 years ago, people were dying of starvation, and now I say that people are not dying of starvation, and indeed in the villages, even in the poorest villages in the northwest, the areas that were known as Monga areas, I mean, sort of famine areas, the people won't allow their neighbour to starve. There is no question. In my mind, that doesn't happen. And even we've seen sort of 15 years ago where somebody very poor in a village, they were being helped by their neighbours giving a cup of rice into a community fund. So I mean that is very encouraging, but one regrets that things could have been better.
Yeah, from this, what I gather, and in one of my readings also, I was come across a very thoughtful anecdote. Many times, the political autonomy is considered as a freedom, and that's a very simplistic way to understand what freedom is. Political autonomy is claimed in multiple zones. When an independent country comes to an existence, it is of course highlighted because that has a special significance. But it happens even within the US as the states grew, number of states came into place. Even in the Indian subcontinent, when the accession of Sikkim happened or Goa liberation happened, those were more of claims towards a political autonomy on those geographic regions. But not necessarily freedom, because freedom is far more wider and deeper, where society is grown to take up their own aspirations forward. If the political autonomy is claimed and a particular government comes into an existence, but the system remains the same, which protects the some and which ignore the others, then do you think that's a true sense of freedom? Or it is just a political autonomy where now Bengalis are ruling, but the way the rule is happening, the grammar of that rule remains the same?
Yeah, that is, it appears to be increasingly like that. I think in the early days, I mean, even going back before 1971, there was very much the language issue, and that was understood even with people who had not gone to school. Yeah, that what you say is absolutely true.
Because even in the Indian independence also, it was the same question at that point in time when the Indian constitution was being drafted, that the nature of that, the legal law arrangement was heavily borrowed from the colonial rule. And it was questioned at that time by multiple intellectuals that this particular region had its own identity, own culture, own ethos, whether that would have a space in this, or are we going with an assumption that whatever is so-called Western and modern is the right, is more progressive, and that is the only way to go? Do you see that kind of colonization of minds in this? Because you are the one who have interacted with the people in 71 who I'm sure you know the aspirations of the young people of then, and when you see the things now, do you see the colonization of mind still exist?
I think that's absolutely true, and what disturbs me is that, I mean, which is quite a simple thing, is that the laws, the British laws, which have been amended in the UK because they're out of date and wrong.
Indeed.
And they've been amended in India, but they haven't been amended here. And that is just very bad government and very bad efficiency.
Yeah.
And that's something that could have been put right. So that makes me and many other people very angry that things like that they haven't even amended things, whether it's to do with the way people with disabilities are labelled or anything else. So the colonial, I'm sure there were some laws which were very good, and there are, for instance, the Chittagong Hill Tracts, the 1900 Chittagong Hill Tracts Act was put in place to protect the indigenous people of the Chittagong Hill Tract. Well, that's been chopped to pieces. It's still on the books, but it's been messed about with, and those people have felt that they are not really Bangladeshis.
So yeah, I mean, it's coming to one. I won't say the conclusion, but I think this is really important thought to take a little bit forward, because somewhere this is something I personally resonate while working here, not only here but in the entire Indian subcontinent, wherever there was a British rule. That somewhere this colonization that exists in the mind of people, so that freedom I think yet to achieve, where people get satisfied and settled with the fact that okay, now instead of British, our own people are there, our own people are the rulers. We see our parliament with our own people, etc. But what are they doing, and how our own individual aspirations are being reflected in our legalities, the discharge of the duties of the duty bearers, the policy makers? On those counts, I think still a long way to go. So what do you think? How do you advise like young people like us, Oxfam and other agencies and civil society organizations? How do you think this can be taken forward?
I don't have the magic solution, but I'm always concerned that Bangladeshis don't know their own history. I mean, they don't know.
Spot on. Yes. We read. I think we have lost this whole reading thing.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
And it feels very strange that they, they're not taught the proper history in schools. Part of that is because the history books have been messed up with when there've been change of government, and so that is very disturbing. And I mean, that's not something that you can put right overnight. It's something that needs the cooperation of whether it's the media houses or the television channels, and as well as the Ministry of Education.
Indeed.
So that's disappointing to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that even we have been grappling with, because whenever I have had some such discussion, and if they go into certain sensitivities, in a very closed door, informal space, people do speak, but when we expect them to come for some things like this podcast or anything in a big formal space where multiple other people are there is a lot of hesitancy that I observe. And hesitancy comes from fear. And when there is a fear, the entire whole concept of freedom is exactly opposite to that. If you are if I'm living in my own free country, I shouldn't be feeling fearful.
No, that's right.
In fact, I should feel more protected, more at home. But my feelings are exactly opposite to that, then something is wrong. So I think, yeah, and you have rightly pointed out that One, the things that we must read, which is of course the textbooks and the history, is of course manipulated, and it's not only in Bangladesh.
No.
We have seen this in India, in Pakistan, in many other countries. History has always been used as a tool to weaponize and to create a propaganda and to a commune kind of, But other than that, I'm sure there are, um, you know, other forms of reading, other forms of engaging oneself to the wisdom. But that whole habit is going.
And the other thing is that with the social media, people will grab hold of information without realizing that is not correct, and so that's another problem. And whether it's and it can be passing a message about medicine or health or something like that, which is totally false, and people don't double check it. I'm sure there must be a beautiful way of putting this in English, but if I have to put it in a very simple way, it's like an essential devil, this whole social media. You can't get rid of it. But at the same time, that it comes with its own difficulties, challenges of fake information and sensitization of certain things without fact checks and all. So we do suffer with that. Yeah, which is true. Okay, coming to the conclusion and the last part, and again, not as an advice and all, but how do you see yourself in you have lived 50 years, you have seen one country getting independence from the liberation war. You have been active participant to the process of supporting the country that is going through that pain, whether it is giving relief to the refugees in India or post-independence coming here, setting up things, working on so many issues, including inclusion, disability. How do you see? Are you satisfied, contented? You feel like something should have been even better? As I said earlier, the progress has been more than people anticipated, and even 30 years ago, for instance, a group of people with disabilities drafted, with my encouragement, the first national disability policy and legislation. Well, it took them more than 10 years to convince the government authorities to do something. Indeed. Well, and then since then, the work related to disability has dramatically improved and enlarged, including with the government, but it's nowhere enough, shall we say. So that's just one aspect of the work that I was involved with, and a lot of the attitude towards people who are less fortunate or disabled, that has to be in the education, that all people are. It's not that a person with disability is a lesser being, and that is a big challenge, and that has to be something that is from primary school onwards, as well as with the religious leaders. I don't know how you get that organized, but that's just an example where other people should have been doing more. Indeed. I mean, it's a continuous work in progress, so I'm sure to encapsulate everything that you have seen, you have witnessed, you have done in a podcast like of an hour or less,
It's extremely difficult. This is just a beginning from Oxfam side. We are going to name this, podcast series. There are few suggestions on card, but I would like all of you who are seeing this, if you would like to name this podcast series, give innovative names, and perhaps we'll select one. Um, the purpose of this podcast series, I had said in the beginning, is not to take any particular agenda to the audience. It's basically to present that how different perspectives exist. And today we talked with Julian about the freedom, and we had, I think, couple of takeaways very clearly came from this conversation. One is that the freedom doesn't get settled by just changing rule. That's just a beginning. The real freedom we can experience when we feel fearless, when we feel hopeful, aspiring. So unless we feel that somewhere the colonization exists in our mind, so unless and until we get completely decolonized from our mind, the freedom struggle continues. So that's I think very important takeaway from this conversation. The second thing is also important is for us to understand that on each concept, whether it is freedom or justice or equality, different perspectives exist. And unless and until we understand that there could be different perspectives, and we should have that in-depth understanding of them, it's very difficult for us to take any active action on this process of nation building and development. So it's very important for us to get at least oriented. We may agree or may disagree. That's a different thing, but it's very important for us to have an understanding that different perspectives do exist. So with that, I think note in mind, I would like all the viewers to provide your comments. How do you find this? This is just an honest, humble beginning, and based on your suggestions, genuine feedback, we will keep improving ourselves. And if you really like genuinely, then please spread the word. Use the like button, and take this, and let's create community of seekers and learners in the development space. So thank you so much.